Reparations. Welcome my viewers to my channel. Subscribe, like, and don't forget to share your thoughts on what you think about this video. I welcome you once more to our discussion on the topic of reparations for African Americans. Now, in this installment, we take a look into the ongoing debate surrounding reparations, featuring insights from the insightful and passionate Emmy Chain, whose TikTok commentary always sparks thought-provoking discussions on the subject. Now, if you want to understand fully what she is talking about on each and every video, then read the comments tagged and hear how she responds to palm color people who are going after her for supporting the fact that Black people should get reparations. Now, as we explore the nuances of this contentious issue, we will be highlighting Emmy's responses to comments from palm color individuals challenging the notion of reparations for the Black community. So join me into this conversation, and for those who enjoy her videos or content rather, this is her TikTok name and you can follow her for more content. With that said, let's get into the videos. I will be right back, and when I do, I share my 2 cents on this.
Something that I wish more understood is that it is not about guilt for sins of the ancestors. First of all, in my opinion, guilt is counterproductive and self-indulgent. It results in one of 2 things: either people refusing to learn about or acknowledge anything that might make them feel guilty. That's where we get denial, willful ignorance, justifications, and deflection. Or fragility, where a person centers their guilt and uses it as an excuse for inaction. That's where we get reverse victim and offender. Gosh, I feel so bad that I don't know what to do. I can't hear about it, so anybody who's talking about it is doing it intentionally to hurt me, and now they are the oppressor. The thing is, it's about the systems of oppression in the United States that we continue to uphold and are complicit in upholding. I don't think people need to pay reparations because they are to blame. I think that the United States owes reparations, and I don't exempt myself for being Asian American. As somebody who lives in the United States in 2023, I also benefit from systems of oppression and atrocities that built the United States. Now, being Asian may mean that I can rest assured that my ancestors don't have the blood of native dyed or the transatlantic slave trade on their hands, but as so many people in the comment threads love to point out, whose ancestors don't at some point in history have some blood for some atrocities on their hands. And the point of learning about that history and acknowledging it is not to make culpability disappear, it's to learn how to do better now. And it's not that the United States doesn't have a history of paying reparations. The United States paid reparations to former enslavers for their economic loss in the formerly enslaved. Lincoln had promised 40 acres and a mule to the formerly enslaved, and that promise was rescinded by Andrew Johnson. So if you don't support reparations, you are supporting the United States' history of that broken promise. The United States paid reparations to Japanese Americans who were interned during World War II, to families who lost loved ones during 9/11, and to Americans who were held in Iran. And that's not about assigning blame to individual American citizens. That's the United States recognizing travesties that should be redressed. So if you don't support reparations, what you're saying is you don't feel that chattel slavery was a travesty that the United States should acknowledge and redress. These are not sins of ancestors. These are actions that we engage in now. If you vote for a president who cracks down on immigration and causes a labor shortage so severe that the agricultural industry resorts to forced prison labor at a rate not seen since Jim Crow, and you refuse to learn about and acknowledge how the United States carceral system extended from the system of chattel slavery, that is not the sins of the ancestors. Those are actions we engage in now. If you feel that no Black American today deserves reparations because they personally were not enslaved, that no person alive today deserves to receive value for what their ancestors did that they personally did not do, then you should be okay with 100% inheritance tax. Okay, you know what we're not going to do, Edward Bloom wannabe? We're not going to mischaracterize the indentured servitude of Chinese railroad workers to gaslight chattel slavery just because you haven't had any luck selling that story with the Irish. Asian Americans are not pawns for you to use to push your anti-Blackness. Inheritance is wanting money for nothing and taking advantage of your ancestors. And the advantage that ancestors gave that their descendants took is an advantage that was systemically and institutionally withheld from Black Americans. And that didn't end with slavery. It was systemically enforced until the 1960s, and institutionally it continues to exist. Reparations is redress for that advantage that other people had access to that was withheld from generational Black Americans. People who contributed to building the nation, had autonomy, were compensated, and had the rights of citizenship. Even immigrants who arrived as indentured servants and personally may not have had autonomy and weren't compensated monetarily, their next generation had autonomy, was compensated, and had the rights of citizenship. Black Americans received none of those things, and for that matter, white immigrants received very little. If you have to qualify your comment with not trying to start a fight, then you're aware of the fact that you are not presenting yourself well, and you're aware of the fact that my video implied no such thing. First of all, Indigenous people were not eradicated. They are still here. Native is ongoing, and Native Americans are deserving of sovereignty, land back, and to have their treaty rights respected. And when I speak about systems of oppression in the United States and supremacy generally, I include all members of the global majority. So either you're not familiar with my content and you spoke out of hand, or you deliberately chose a video where I was speaking about the racial triangulation of Asian Americans specifically to cause harm to Black people for the purposes of deflection and to start a fight. A big part of why I focus on Asian American and Black American issues is because I am a human being with an actual life that has made me more familiar with certain people and certain issues. In my anti-oppression work, I do support all marginalized people. However, a big part of doing that work effectively is knowing when to speak and when not to speak and when to listen. So what Indigenous people deserve from me is for me to listen to them and to not speak on issues that I'm not educated about. It's interesting how on a video in which I was speaking in support of reparations for Black Americans, you entered the conversation by saying that Asian Americans should stand up and fight for their own reparations first. But now you're asking a Black commenter, how many times have you seen Asian Americans stand up for reparations for Black people? It's almost like you're indoctrinated into talking out both sides of your mouth to create division among people of the global majority. But I'm so glad that you didn't do any research before posting these questions, because it provides me with an excellent opportunity to talk about the history of solidarity between Black people and Asian Americans, particularly where it comes to reparations and civil rights. Asian Americans and Japanese Americans in particular are strong proponents of reparations for Black Americans. In December 2022, over 70 Asian American organizations led by Japanese American organizations sent a letter to President Biden urging him to form the commission to study and develop a plan for reparations modeled after H.R. 40. And it is not just Asian Americans. This is a movement that is gaining support from members of the global majority. And in the 1970s, as Japanese Americans were fighting for their own reparations, Black Americans were their strongest supporters. Frederick Douglass spoke out against the Chinese Exclusion Act. The Asian American movement and Asian American political alliance were inspired by and worked with the Black Power movement. There was yellow peril for Black Power. So just because you are ignorant of the solidarity between our communities doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Let's not get it twisted. In the conversation you're still having, there was only one Asian who was talking about reparations. It was me, and I was talking about reparations for Black Americans. Now you're facing pushback because you attempted to hijack that conversation by saying, what about Asian Americans? And outside the United States, you feel that your opinion, which you've repeatedly demonstrated is based on ignorance and misinformation, is entitled to the same consideration as my lived experience as a third-generation Asian American. So now you are inserting what you want Asian Americans to do in the place of actual Asian Americans to reverse victim and offender. The only times that speaking up for Asian American rights gets framed as being anti-Black is when Asian Americans are intentionally being used to cause harm to Black people, such as in attacking race-conscious admissions policies in education and scapegoating Black people for the increase in anti-Asian violence, because that is how racial triangulation of Asian Americans by supremacy against Black people works. Now, if you consider duration and magnitude of harm done, I personally feel that Black Americans and Native Americans have every right to occupy the front of the line for as long as it takes to receive remedies and redress for historical and ongoing harms, and to tell other people to get in the back of the line. But historically, that is not what has happened. Again, Frederick Douglass spoke out against the Chinese Exclusion Act. Black Americans supported Japanese Americans in their fight for reparations, so I, as an Asian American, will continue to support Black people in their fight for reparations. And the last thing I'm going to do is prioritize what you want Asian Americans to do, because people like you would prefer that marginalized people remain separated in their groups, fighting over scraps in the alley rather than working together in the kitchen. Nobody is angry, and you are not being oppressed. You are being held accountable for asking a disingenuous question designed to gaslight and to create division. If you were genuinely looking for real solutions regarding land back and how it might be implemented, you wouldn't be asking these questions on an Asian American creator's videos. You would be listening to Indigenous people. Because it's not my place to talk about what is land back and how it might be implemented, except I will say that the way you are framing land back is, in my understanding, a straw man argument, because that is not what most Indigenous people mean by land back. And you are doing what typically people do when they want to gaslight land back and reparations, which is they'll say, well, I'm a good person and I would like to support your cause, but can you tell me exactly what it is and exactly how to do that? Because if you can't, then I can't support you because there's nothing to support. But I'm a good person for having asked. I'm looking for real solutions. And the reason why you're asking, is it just people who would have to give back their land, or is it also Black people, is because you're trying to create division among people of the global majority. You are hoping that Black people will say, I'm not giving anything back, I didn't steal anything. Just as when the conversation is about reparations for Black Americans, people are always looking for Asian Americans to say, I'm not paying reparations, I wasn't even here for that. And that's not going to work here, because as I've said before, as somebody who was born and raised in the United States, unfortunately, I am somebody who benefited from stolen land and from what was built by chattel slavery. So I'm not going to escape accountability by saying, hey, I just got here and none of that was my fault. Because supporting land back and reparations is how we move towards a more equitable and just society that a lot of us would like to live in. Again, if you are genuinely looking for real solutions regarding land back, listen to Indigenous people.
Now, the issue of reparations for Black Americans is not merely about assigning blame for historical injustices. It's about acknowledging the lasting effects of systemic racism and inequality that continue to plague our society today. While some may argue that they shouldn't be held accountable for the sins of their ancestors, it's very important to recognize that the legacy of slavery, segregation, and discrimination still reverberates through generations, disproportionately affecting Black communities. Reparations are not about assigning guilt to individuals, but rather addressing the institutionalized barriers that hinder the socio-economic advancement of Black Americans. The wealth gap, disparities in education, healthcare, and criminal justice are all manifestations of this ongoing injustice. Moreover, the argument that individuals today should not be responsible for the actions of their ancestors ignores the fact that many continue to benefit from the privileges and advantages accrued through centuries of exploitation and oppression. Economic prosperity, access to education, and social mobility are often directly linked to the advantages gained from historical injustices. So paying reparations is not just a matter of rectifying past wrongs, it's an investment in building a more equitable society for future generations. It's about addressing the systemic inequalities that persist and providing restitution for the economic and social injustices inflicted upon Black Americans. Why talk about reparations? Well, it's because of the profound and wide-ranging impact of historical injustices on present-day realities. The institution of slavery and subsequent Jim Crow laws systematically deprived Black individuals of their basic human rights, subjected them to brutal exploitation, and perpetuated a cycle of generational poverty. While slavery officially ended over a century ago, its legacy persists in the form of enduring racial disparities. Black Americans continue to face higher rates of unemployment, lower wages, and limited access to quality education and healthcare compared to their palm-color counterparts. These disparities are not merely coincidental, but are rooted in a history of deliberate discrimination and disfranchisement. The argument that individuals today should not be held accountable for the actions of their ancestors fails to acknowledge the ongoing intergenerational transfer of wealth and privilege. Many palm-color Americans have inherited advantages, both tangible and intangible, that can be traced back to the exploitation of Black labor and resources. Reparations offer a means of addressing these systemic inequalities by providing financial compensation, investing in education, and economic empowerment programs, and implementing policies aimed at dismantling institutional racism. The call for restitution extends beyond mere financial compensation. Reparations encompass a comprehensive approach to redressing historical injustices and addressing the structural inequities that persist today. This includes acknowledging the trauma inflicted on Black communities, investing in initiatives to promote racial healing and reconciliation, and implementing policies to dismantle systemic racism. Reparations are not a novel concept. Throughout history, various marginalized groups, including Japanese Americans interned during World War II and Holocaust survivors, have received reparations as a means of acknowledging past wrongs and providing restitution for the harm inflicted upon them. In the case of Black Americans, reparations are a necessary step towards rectifying centuries of systemic oppression and ensuring justice for those who have been disproportionately affected by racism and discrimination. Moreover, the argument that paying reparations would be financially burdensome overlooks the economic benefits of addressing racial disparities. Studies have shown that closing the racial wealth gap and investing in communities of color and Black people can lead to significant economic growth and prosperity for society as a whole. By investing in the economic empowerment of Black Americans, they can create a more equitable and prosperous future for everyone. Ultimately, the case for reparations is not just about righting past wrongs. It's about building a more just and inclusive society where every individual has the opportunity to thrive. It's about acknowledging the full scope of the harm inflicted upon Black communities and taking meaningful steps towards healing and reconciliation. Only through collective action and a commitment to justice can people truly reckon with the legacy of slavery and move towards a future where all individuals are treated with dignity and respect. The call for reparations for Black Americans is rooted in a history of systemic oppression and racial injustice that spans centuries. Throughout history, various marginalized groups, including Japanese Americans interned during World War II and Holocaust survivors, have received reparations as a means of acknowledging past wrongs and providing restitution for the harm inflicted upon them. However, when it comes to Black Americans, there is often pushback and resistance. Why? With some questioning why they should be entitled to reparations. First and foremost, it's essential to acknowledge the unique and unparalleled suffering endured by Black Americans throughout history. From the brutal institution of slavery to the era of Jim Crow segregation and ongoing systemic racism, Black individuals have faced pervasive discrimination and violence that have profoundly impacted their lives and livelihoods. This history of oppression has resulted in enduring racial disparities in wealth, education, healthcare, and criminal justice, among other areas. The argument that other groups have received reparations while Black Americans should not is deeply flawed and overlooks the specificity of the harm inflicted upon Black communities. The transatlantic slave trade and centuries of chattel slavery were unparalleled in their brutality and scope, resulting in the forced labor exploitation and dehumanization of millions of Black individuals. This legacy of slavery has had far-reaching consequences that continue to reverberate through generations, contributing to the systemic inequalities that persist today. So, can the US pay reparations already? Because why not? We have finally come to the end of the video. What do you, my viewers, have to say? Share your comments in the comment section down below. Thank you for watching and see you in my next video.